Good day and welcome to Drew's Book Reviews. Today we're going to talk about my nonfiction read for the month, Carl Sagan's The Demon Haunted World. So if you're interested in what I have to say in The Demon Haunted World by Carl Sagan, stay tuned. That is coming right up on Drew's Book Reviews. Hey everyone, it's Drew from Drew's Book Reviews, and here on this channel I talk about all things science fiction, fantasy, and occasionally non-fiction sprinkled in there as I talk all about the books that I love. So if you enjoy this content, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button. You could also join me down in the Discord or Patreon, which will be linked below. Alright, so let's talk a little bit about Carl Sagan's Demon Haunted World. This is my non-fiction read for the month of June. We're in June now, for the month of June. Getting a month behind there. Anyway, this is my pick for my nonfiction read for this month, and it's all about science as a candle in the dark. So this book is about 25 years old now, maybe a little bit more. Carl Sagan talks about how science needs to be a guidepost for essentially learning the truth about the world as we know it. And that's the basic premise behind Demon Haunted World. This book has been praised and it's been adored for years, and there is good reason for the love and respect that this book has gotten. That being said, I haven't rated as high as others would have rated this book or have rated this book based on everything that they've talked about. So I actually first got this book because I was intrigued by the praise that I had received, and I'd heard so many good and wonderful things about it. And I just want to be clear, there are some really great aspects of this book. There's some great underlying ideas and messaging behind this book that are just sorely needed. In fact, as I was reading this book, I was thinking to myself, if ever there's a time that we need more science literacy that this book advocates for, it is in our modern day, when we have so many conspiracy theories based off of pseudoscientific nonsense spreading around the internet, and people are willfully, deliberately, or otherwise ignorant of the reality of science, the scientific method, and the actual science behind everything from 5G conspiracy theories to people going on about hoaxes and government conspiracies about all kinds of things with respect to the modern world and the things that afflict us now. I mean, science has been an absolutely miraculous tool that has benefited our lives to such a great extreme, and yet people are so ignorant of what the scientific method is. There's still a lot of people that are. They don't understand the process. They don't understand how science works. They don't understand how these things work together to create benefit for society, for the common good. Now, Carl Sagan absolutely discusses how science can absolutely be used for evil, and that when we use science to create technologies for bad purposes, that is not a good thing either. And he willfully admits that effectively there is this mad scientist idea out there that's portrayed in our media, and he says, yeah, sometimes there are scientists who are bent on creating destructive weapons, talking about the scientist that can't quite remember his name who he's talking to, but one of the scientists that played a key role in the creation of things like the hydrogen bomb. So he absolutely discusses that, yeah, sometimes there's these scientists out there that I suppose you could call mad scientists that are obsessed with creating these destructively powerful things in the world. So that science definitely is not immune to those things, but overall it has been essentially a light in the dark to illuminate the world about things that happen, how the world works, and where it comes from, and contrast that with pseudoscience. One of the things that he really focuses on with his ideas and concepts that he's trying to explain is this: he focuses a lot on the alien abduction scenario and how people who believe in alien abduction or believe they have been abducted by aliens, these experiences may very well be very real for them, but there's absolutely no evidence for alien abductions in our society. And you contrast that against ancient mythologies, ancient ideas, to medieval days about stories of events that happened to people that have very, very similar elements from start to finish, going all the way back to medieval days. You know, it used to be demons, now it's aliens. have replaced the demons and how these things have actually happened throughout history. So he uses that to kind of contrast this pseudoscientific approach with the actual science approach within the world and how we approach that. And he also goes on to discuss a few other aspects with relation to that. And I will say this, if this book absolutely, I would have to say, has trigger warning for some aspects that he talks about when he starts discussing things surrounding childhood trauma. And I just want to put out there, absolutely, there's a trigger warning with the things that he discusses in relation to childhood trauma and victimization. And I'm just going to leave it at that because I don't want to get into details. Trigger warning that it's something that can be a very sensitive and disturbing subject matter, especially for those who may have experienced the things he's talking about. So I'm just going to leave it at that, and be aware that is contained within this book. So one thing that's really great that he talks about when he's discussing the scientific method and how we need to approach that and why it's so important. So one of the things he talks about, it's not just about using the scientific method to teach or to learn the truth about the world and how it works, but he emphasizes that we need to also teach the scientific method. One of the things he says is, if we only teach the findings of science without communicating its critical method, how can the average person possibly distinguish pseudoscience from actual science? And that is vital. That is so important to understanding the difference and recognizing the difference between pseudoscience and actual science, which is so important. And he also goes into a little bit of a discussion about the importance of knowledge, the importance of having knowledge accessible and available to us. Now, it's really great that we live in this age of the modern world, the internet. We've got the knowledge of the world at our fingertips, essentially, with all of our devices, where knowledge is out there for us to get. It's everywhere. We just have to look for it. And of course, half the battle being you don't know what you don't know, so you don't know to look up the things that you don't know because you don't know you know them, or don't know them. You get the point. Anyway, the point is, knowledge is very important. Understanding knowledge is important, and understanding how we derive that knowledge is vital of importance when it comes to scientific literacy and illuminating that darkness in this demon-haunted world, as Carl Sagan puts it. One of the other aspects he touched on was the idea of censorship of knowledge and controlling information, and how important it is to not have that within our societies. As Carl Sagan put it in the book, censoring knowledge, telling people what they must think, is the aperture to thought police, foolish and incompetent decision-making, and long-term decline. And I am absolutely on board with that idea. So Carl Sagan definitely puts a lot into his books, into this book, as far as the ideas and the concepts surrounding science and investigation and how science can be used as a benefit or light to a candle in the dark. So let's just go on to a little bit to kind of the drawbacks that I found with this book. Because as I mentioned earlier, I didn't rate it as high as other books, and other people have rated this book throughout Goodreads. Alright, so as for things that I didn't like about this book, there are a few aspects of what Carl Sagan is discussing in this book that really made it feel outdated and not really applicable to the modern day. This is kind of where the drawbacks come in and why I rated it a bit lower, because I didn't really feel like it's aged well, essentially. And the few aspects of that are, one, the alien conspiracy stuff that he talked about. Alien abductions is kind of something from the 90s. Granted, this book was written in the 90s, but it hasn't really aged well with respect to that. This just isn't something that is part of our pop culture anymore. And so it doesn't really jive with the modern era as far as how scientific literacy goes. I imagine if Carl Sagan had written this book today, he would be talking a lot about the skepticism relating to the COVID-19 and other things related to that. I would imagine that there would have been a lot to say about that if he were writing this book today. But in the 90s, you know, the alien abduction scenario with the shows like the X-Files was all the hype and all the rage. So definitely I'm not surprised he focused on that when he wrote this book back in the 90s, but it definitely is not something that is as prevalent today, or it's kind of subsided. There's definitely still people, I expect there's still people out there that firmly believe in the alien abductions and are part of that community. I don't doubt that. But it was kind of outdated, and that it's not really prevalent in our pop culture today, or even not pop culture, just as far as the prevailing beliefs go. It's just not as popular. We don't hear about it as much. So it really felt about pretty outdated with that, as well as discussion about the education system and how poorly it educates people and our kids in the scientific realm, and using, the candle, or the candle in the dark of science and the scientific method. This is 25 years ago that he's discussing the state of the education system, and I'm confident that it has improved. As far as I can tell, it's improved since I was a kid, at least here in Canada, and I'm sure that's true for the US as well. So that definitely wouldn't be applicable now when we're 25 years later. Now, I don't know how the US education system compares to the rest of the world now, and I'm certainly not making claims to a perfect education system in Canada or the US. It really kind of felt outdated with the stats and metrics that he was referring to. Was applicable maybe in his day, but definitely not now. So it definitely felt outdated for that reason as well. One of the other things that he discussed was he lamented the lack of scientific literacy and educational programming in our media. And back in 1995, from what I remember of 1995 in the 90s, I would have to agree with Carl Sagan that in the 90s, yeah, there was a big lack of educational media in the 90s. I could absolutely agree with that sentiment and that statement. I mean, this was back in the days of analog cable. The internet was barely even thought of at that point. And I don't remember walking into a bookstore and seeing an entire section devoted to, educational books. There was, this tiny little part of one section that might have had some educational books. But generally, bookstores are filled with fiction, science fiction, fantasy, not typically these educational stuff as far as every section goes. But now, when I walk into a bookstore, there's an entire section filled with history, science, politics, religions. There's entire sections just filled with these books. So there's so much more educational material in the books that we could buy at our bookstores now. For example, Carl Sagan's book, as well as a variety of others and all the other nonfiction books that I read on this channel, are available to buy at your local bookstore now, in these massive sections taking up several rows of books, and at least in my local bookstore. We have YouTube channels devoted to science education. We have all kinds of TV networks such as Smithsonian Channel, BBC Earth, for example, are channels that are devoted to educational based content and scientific literacy. And we definitely see that in terms of educational science-based shows and media, there is so much more now than there was back in 1995. So Carl Sagan lamented the lack of educational-based media back in 1995. And perhaps it was people like him and a variety of others that, encouraged the opening of the floodgates, so to speak, of bringing about a world full of educational media. Curiosity Stream is another example. It's a service that I absolutely love, filled with all kinds of documentaries around science, technology, history, politics, sociology, and all kinds of stuff on Curiosity Stream. So definitely outdated as far as not having the opportunity to learn science through our media. Yeah, in 95 we didn't, but we certainly do now. So a lot has changed. And I certainly wouldn't claim that it's because of Carl Sagan, but I will say that if Carl Sagan was with us today, that he would absolutely love the amount of educational media available to us now. And overall, because it does feel a bit outdated with respect to the demon-haunted world, overall I did enjoy it, and I want to emphasize that I absolutely enjoyed it. The underlying message of this book is vital. The underlying message that we need scientific literacy as a benefit to the world and for a highly educated and productive society is important. The underlying message is fantastic and one I absolutely jive with. But because it felt outdated in these ways, it really kind of drew back my overall rating of the book. I did give it a 3 out of 5 stars on Goodreads, which means I liked it. I didn't love it. It wasn't perfect. And I didn't hate it. I did enjoy it overall. So there I have it. There are my thoughts on Demon Haunted World by Carl Sagan. Science as a Candle in the Dark. Definitely, if you want to read a book that discusses the importance of scientific literacy and understanding, this is the book for you. This is a really good book for that, albeit a bit outdated at this point. But anyway, those are my thoughts on Demon Haunted World by Carl Sagan. So thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And join me over on the Discord and Patreon if you so desire. And we will see you next time on the next episode of Drew's Book Reviews. Until then, keep on reading. Bye.